Nobody talks about where you're standing when the sky goes wrong. They show you the blast radius maps, the colored circles, red for instant death, orange for severe burns, yellow for you might survive if the wind cooperates. They run the casualty projections and hold the press conferences, and everybody nods gravely and moves on. But here's what those maps almost never show. What happens to the places that aren't on them? The place is far enough away that the explosion itself doesn't kill you, because surviving the blast is only the beginning of the problem. For most Americans, it's actually the easiest part. Nuclear winter is not a theory. It's a documented atmospheric phenomenon backed by physics, paleoclimatology, and peer-reviewed climate modeling. When nuclear weapons detonate over cities, they don't just destroy buildings, they ignite them. Massive firestorms inject black carbon soot directly into the upper stratosphere, where it spreads around the entire planet within weeks. Sunlight dims, temperatures drop globally, crops fail on a timeline that outpaces any government's ability to respond. A study published in Nature Food modeled a scenario involving fewer than 100 warheads, a regional conflict between India and Pakistan, not even involving the United States, and projected a food shortfall putting 5 billion people at risk of starvation within 2 years. 5 billion people, from a war most Americans couldn't find on a map. Now imagine what that sky actually looks like. Not the dramatic orange of a sunset, more like a permanent overcast, a gray lid pressing down on everything day after day. The sun showing up as a pale smear on the horizon, temperatures dropping in July, crops that should be thriving sitting stunted in soil that refuses to warm up. Nebraska cornfield in the middle of summer, green but wrong, short, struggling, producing a fraction of what they should. And then the silence when the supply trucks stop coming and nobody knows when or whether they're coming back. That's the world we're planning around. Not a bad week, not a rough season. 2 to 5 years of disrupted growing cycles, collapsed supply chains, mass migration, and the complete unraveling of every system you currently depend on to stay alive. The states on this list aren't here because they're lucky. They're here because of geography, water access, soil quality, population density, and variables most people never think about until it's too late to act on them. Let's start with the most counterintuitive one, Montana. Your first instinct is to dismiss it. It's cold already. Why would you want to be here when nuclear winter makes it colder? That instinct is backward, and the reason tells you everything about how this actually works. Yes, Malmstrom Air Force Base in Great Falls is a primary nuclear target. The missile silos scattered along the High Line are on every serious targeting list. Anyone telling you Montana is consequence-free isn't being honest with you. But Montana is enormous. Prevailing winds move east across the plains. The communities tucked into the Bitterroot Valley and the Flathead Lake watershed sit far enough from those detonation corridors that the immediate risk profile looks meaningfully different from most of the country. Higher latitude states do get hit harder by cooling in most nuclear winter models. That's real. But Montana's agricultural baseline is already built for exactly that reality. Picture a wheat farmer outside Missoula who stores 6 months of grain as standard operating procedure. Not as a prepper, just as a farmer managing a brutal climate. He already heats with wood, already plans around late frosts, already runs his operation without the just-in-time supply chain assumptions that would collapse urban populations within weeks of disruption. The extra cold of nuclear winter is not a new problem for him. It's a harder version of the one he's been solving his entire life. And that distinction between a new catastrophe and an escalated familiar challenge is the difference between paralysis and adaptation. The Missouri River headwaters and the Flathead Lake watershed provide clean water access that remains viable even when surface systems elsewhere are compromised. You cannot grow food without it. You cannot treat wounds or maintain sanitation without it. Montana has it reliably, in a geography that keeps it relatively protected from contamination. Idaho. Not because of Boise. Cities are liabilities in this scenario, not assets. The reason Idaho makes this list is the Snake River Plain and one specific crop, the potato. Idaho produces more than 30% of the nation's potatoes, a crop that yields more calories per acre than almost any other staple. tolerates cooler soil temperatures, stores well underground, and grows below the surface where the erratic temperature swings of nuclear winter matter considerably less. That agricultural profile looks unremarkable in normal times. In a world where the sun stops showing up reliably, it looks like the kind of thing civilizations are built around. Think about what day 90 looks like in the Snake River Plain versus Los Angeles. In southern Idaho, communities are organized around water rights, cold storage, and seasonal crop rotation. The social infrastructure of food production is intact. Families know the land, the water table, which fields produce under stress and which ones don't. In Los Angeles, by day 90, you have 30 million people in a coastal basin with no agricultural land, no meaningful groundwater, and supply chains designed to survive days of disruption at most. The comparison isn't even close, and it doesn't get closer over time. It widens. Population density in Idaho is also low enough that social collapse dynamics unfold slowly enough for adaptation. In any breakdown scenario, the pace at which chaos arrives is often more determinative than the chaos itself. Communities that have time to establish local governance, develop informal trade, and organize mutual defense survive. Communities that experience overnight collapse do not, regardless of what resources they're sitting on. Nebraska. The Great Plains get dismissed because people picture flat land and agricultural monotony. That mental image would cost you your life. Nebraska sits over the thickest and most accessible portion of the Ogallala Aquifer, one of the largest underground freshwater reserves on Earth, stretching beneath 8 states. The Ogallala isn't infinite. Decades of intensive irrigation have depleted it significantly in Texas and southern Kansas, and anyone pretending otherwise is selling you something. But Nebraska's portion remains the deepest and most robust section of the entire system. In a world where municipal infrastructure has failed and surface water is unreliable, a state that can pump clean groundwater from hundreds of feet below the surface is a state that can keep people alive when almost everything else has stopped working. Now add the soil. The deep, dark, nitrogen-rich topsoil of the Nebraska plains is some of the most productive agricultural land on Earth. Industrial farming collapses without fuel and synthetic fertilizer. That's a given. But transitioning to lower yield, hand-managed cultivation on that soil is a fundamentally different challenge than trying to grow food in depleted clay or thin topsoil. The raw material is there. The question is whether the human knowledge and organization to use it survives, and that question is answerable. Nebraska also sits far enough from both coasts that the migration wave, tens of millions fleeing destroyed cities, arrives later and with less intensity than it would further east or west. That's not comfort, it's time. And time, in a collapse, is the only resource that buys you all the others. Minnesota. 10% of the world's freshwater surface sits on Minnesota's northeastern border, Lake Superior alone. Not as a trivia fact, as a survival variable in a world where infrastructure failure has made clean water the single most critical resource on the planet. One state, one lake, 10% of everything. But here's what most people miss about Minnesota, and it's the angle that makes it genuinely remarkable. Fishing. Not as a hobby, as a primary protein source that operates completely independently of surface agriculture. The lakes of Minnesota, all 10,000 of them, are cold, deep, and productive under that same gray lid that has killed the growing season everywhere else. Walleye and northern pike don't need sunlight. They don't need warm soil. They don't care that July feels like October. When the fields can't produce and the supply chains are gone, the lakes keep giving. Communities that can fish at scale don't face the same protein cliff that purely agricultural communities do. And that independence from the sky is an advantage almost no other state can match. Layer on that the Iron Range for metal ore and tool production, the North Woods for fuel, a dairy industry with farming knowledge deep enough to survive the transition from industrial methods to sustainable lower-yield production. Minnesota is not one thing. It's a stack of independent survival systems that reinforce each other. That redundancy is exactly what makes a place livable when the normal world stops functioning. Kansas. The objection is predictable. Whiteman Air Force Base, McConnell, Fort Riley, real targets, they'd be struck. But Kansas is a large state, and those installations in the east don't make the western high plains uninhabitable. Communities west of Wichita sit in a meaningfully different risk category. Not zero, but manageable relative to most of the country. Imagine a small town west of Dodge City 18 months in. No grid, no supply lines, the sky still that flat gray. But the grain is stored, the cattle are alive, the well still works. Someone's grandmother remembers how her mother put up food for winter without electricity, and that knowledge is now the most valuable thing in the county. That's not a fantasy. It's a description of communities that already exist in western Kansas, operating on rhythms that predate modern infrastructure by generations. What this region offers is the Oglala's western reach, extraordinary agricultural soil, and a farming culture that still knows how to do things the hard way, how to butcher, how to preserve, how to save seed across seasons, how to treat an infected wound when the nearest hospital is a memory. That knowledge exists in communities or it doesn't exist at all. It cannot be improvised in the aftermath of a collapse. In western Kansas, it's already there. Wisconsin. One thing Wisconsin has that no other state on this list can match at the same scale: cheese. That sounds almost absurd in this context, but think about what cheese actually is. It's not just food, it's a preservation technology, a way of converting perishable protein and fat into a shelf-stable form that sustains communities through long, brutal periods without refrigeration. Wisconsin produces more cheese than any other state in the country, and the cultural knowledge embedded in that process, fermentation timing, aging conditions, cold storage management, is exactly the kind of distributed, low-technology food security that nuclear winter demands. You cannot learn that from a tutorial after the grid goes down. It has to already exist in the hands of people who've done it their whole lives. Beyond the cheese, and it does feel strange to write beyond the cheese in a nuclear survival script, but here we are. Wisconsin's freshwater geography is extraordinary. Lake Michigan on the east, Lake Superior on the north, the Wisconsin River threading through the interior. Population density that drops dramatically north of Green Bay, creating exactly the kind of low-pressure environment where communities have time and space to adapt rather than collapse. North woods with enough fuel wood to heat communities through winters far colder than anything in living memory. It's a state with clear answers to the three questions that ultimately determine whether a community survives. What do you eat? What do you drink? And how do you stay warm? Wisconsin answers all three without reaching. Wyoming. Population 580,000 people. The least populated state in the country, and that number changes the survival equation more than almost any other single variable. Fewer people means less competition for resources, slower breakdown, more time to organize, and a realistic alignment between what the land can produce and what the people on it actually need. Wyoming's ranching and agricultural capacity could sustain its population even under significantly degraded conditions. That is simply not true for California, Texas, Florida, or New York, where the gap between local production and local consumption is so enormous that no realistic adaptation closes it fast enough. Picture a ranch outside of Cody in year 2 of nuclear winter. The sky is still that same flat gray. The growing season is shorter than it's ever been, but the cattle are there, the horses are there. The well is pulling clean water from the Wind River Basin. The rancher and his sons are doing what their grandfather did, working land and animals with their hands, without systems, without supply chains, without anything that needs a functioning civilization behind it. That image is not nostalgia. In nuclear winter, it's a blueprint. Wyoming is also one of the top energy-producing states in the country: coal, natural gas, wind, which allows for meaningful power generation even when the national grid has failed. The skills that everywhere else have been replaced by machinery are still alive here and practiced by people who chose to keep them. In the first years of nuclear winter, the most valuable people on Earth will not be the ones with the most sophisticated technology. They'll be the ones who still know how to work without it. Before the closer, here's what this actually means for you, practically. You don't have to move tomorrow, but 3 things are worth acting on regardless of where you currently live. First, water independence. Know your nearest non-municipal source is, have filtration capacity, and store more than you think you need. Second, production knowledge, not just storage. Stored food runs out. One season of actual hands-on gardening teaches you more about real food security than a year of prepper content. The knowledge has to get into your body, not just your head. Third, community investment before you need it. Every geographic advantage on this list can be neutralized by internal conflict. The communities that outlast the collapse will be the ones that already have trust, mutual aid, and informal structures that hold when formal institutions fail. You cannot build that in a crisis. You build it now, in the ordinary years before anything has gone wrong. What binds these 7 states together isn't just natural resources. It's the fact that in each of them you can still find communities where the old knowledge hasn't died, where people understand the relationship between land and survival in a direct, practical, unmediated way that most of the country traded away for convenience decades ago. That knowledge is the actual survival technology. The land and the water are just the platform it runs on. Nuclear winter will not arrive with a countdown clock. The window between the first exchange and the moment the atmospheric consequences reshaping the world will be measured in days, not years. The decisions that determine whether you survive that window are the ones you make now, in the time before anything looks urgent. Montana, Idaho, Nebraska, Minnesota, Kansas, Wisconsin, Wyoming. These are the places where the land itself gives you a chance, where the water doesn't run out, where the winters, brutal as they already are, have been survived before by communities who knew what they were doing and passed that knowledge down to people who still use it. The most dangerous place to be in nuclear winter is anywhere you ended up by accident.